You are listening to the RAMA Blueprints podcast, Above and Beyond, Silencio Jamás, a live Tres Generaciones, Three Voices podcast. On June 27, 2024, we facilitated a live discussion with three generations of LGBTQ+ Latina community leaders. Tonight we're here in community, and we're going to tell the story, our story, her story, his story, and the history of the Latina social political organizations in the San Francisco Mission District and citywide, how we have moved forward honoring those ancestors who gave their lives to bring us to this present moment. Tonight we will be in community to address the resilience, the invisibility, the persecution, the homophobia, identity politics, the migration, and the impact of the HIV/AIDS epidemic on our community. And tonight we are gathered in a sacred circle with our vision facing forward into improving our community's future, creating and strengthening our existing collaborations, and acknowledging that no matter what obstacles we face, the crises we go through, we've encountered the community, and that the community responds and rises above, such as above and beyond within the movement. Silencio Jamás is in reference to how we as a community will no longer remain silent and invisible to the reality of this city, which proclaims to be the safest city for all. However, it is evident sanctuary does not mean safe. Nationally, hate crimes against LGBTQ+ folks have almost tripled in the last 3 years. Oh, Mateo. Let me add some additional historical facts. Pride Month is celebrated every June to commemorate the 1969 Stonewall Uprising in New York City. It's a huge civil rights LGBTQ movement. But generally what's overlooked is the Latino connection to the LGBTQ history, and which actually started 10 years before. Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans played key roles in demonstrations around the country. In 1959, imagine this, in 1959, a group of drag queens and hustlers fought the LAPD at a donut shop in downtown LA, which historians now say was one of the first modern LGBTQ uprisings. At Stonewall, there was a Puerto Rican woman named Silvia Rivera, a Puerto Rican Venezolana, and she was the first American transgendered woman, and she's rarely credited for throwing one of the first bottles at police. Rivera would later on help link the radical group, the Young Lords, to LGBTQ liberation. It's never mentioned. Now in San Francisco in the 70s, once the community realized that we needed to create our own type of services because the city's healthcare providers refused to include people of color in conversations dealing with their health and did not take into account the needs of the families living specifically in the Mission District. So that lack of accessible and non-biased healthcare providers led by trailblazers in this community and other communities to begin the first integrated community-based clinic in San Francisco here in the Mission District. In '75, the San Francisco Gay Latino Alliance, GALA, was founded in San Francisco, spurred by an interest in creating a Latino float for the Gay Pride Parade. It was the first gay Latino organization to exist in the United States and was situated here in the Mission District in San Francisco. The group was created in response to the lack of focus on intersectionality in the San Francisco gay community. One of its founders, Diane Felix, lovingly known as Chili D, co-founded various different queer organizations, including Community United in Response to AIDS, SIDA, Curas, and in 1981, Proyecto Contra SIDA, Por Vida in 1993. In '85, unfortunately, the city was devastated by the epidemic. In '87, the Real Alternatives Program, Por Vida program, added the HIV prevention program and outreach program in collaboration with the Latino AIDS Project. In 1991, Águilas was formed to address the needs of the Latino gay community. And in 1994, Águilas was provided a grant by the San Francisco Department of Public Health AIDS Office to address specifically the needs of the Latino community. And since then, HIV prevention services in San Francisco have continued to service all communities despite moving through the mazes of budget cuts, which currently many organizations are facing right now, while still addressing health disparities. There are an estimated 904,000 LGBTQ plus immigrants in the United States, which means that more than 1 in 10 LGBTQ adults are immigrants. What is the current climate here in San Francisco? Today, we have gathered 3 individuals whose life's journeys and work in the LGBTQ plus services and advocacy have brought them here to this day. We have with us an elder, our elder, Dr. Eduardo Morales, PhD, a distinguished professor emeritus of Alliant International University and one of the founders and current executive director of Águilas. Dr. Morales. For our current changemaker, we have Claudia Cabrera, a transgendered woman who immigrated from Guatemala and moved to San Francisco in 2001. Claudia is currently the program director of Sí a la Vida from Instituto Familiar de la Raza. And the future, what we call the emerging leaders. Luca Fernandez is with us. He's an advocate. He's a Promesas participant, a program of Instituto Familiar de la Raza. Welcome, all of my guests. So we asked them to give us a response to the following question. Reflecting on your work philosophy and how you have managed to stay balanced and present in your values and beliefs while working in the community. So we'll start with Dr. Morales. Please share with us your thoughts on that question.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. I wanted to comment on a couple of things. Actually, in Los Angeles, there was an organization called GLUE, formed in the early 80s to focus on LGBTQ people in Los Angeles and dealing with them. And they were pretty strong. Then suddenly it faded away. And that's one of the things that happens in our community, is that things rise up, it moves along, and then suddenly it fades away. One of the things that I discovered when I was doing a presentation at a conference in Houston was that we discovered that there were like 5 or 6 different organizations in Texas. Wow. This was in 1978, which I was really surprised. And I think part of it is that we haven't have a connection with what's happening across the United States. And so a lot of times we focus on what's going on in our community, which rightfully so needs the attention. But it's important to know and learn lessons from what other people have learned and what they're doing, and help each other in that way. So for me, answering your question was, how do I deal with this balance? I'm originally from New York City. I got my graduate degree in Texas, and then my internship in Washington, D.C., and then was in Sacramento for a couple of years and worked with a couple of Latinx community agencies there. And then I moved to San Francisco in '78 and discovered Concha, who was trying to move and get an institution ready and up and running and funded by the Department of Public Health to really focus on not only serving the Latinx community, but actually developing a strategy of how to properly create interventions that integrate culture, language, and customs that people have. So for me, in managing all these different kinds of things, of course, there's meditation and prayer, which rightfully we started our session here with that, with some music. Keep active in an exercise program. rest and take vacations. We have to take care of ourselves. Sometimes, you know, we don't want to get burned out. I'm actually a singer as well, and I was with the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus when it first began, and went on tour, the first tour that they did nationally. And I play guitar and make music. And so I'm I like to get involved in artistic activities. Stay in contact with colleagues for continual support and inspiration, and I maintain connections and educated about various Latinx populations and cultures, because although there are some commonalities, there are a lot of differences and unique aspects among Latinx populations. So that's...
Thank you. Thank you for that. So you like to sing? Maybe we'll ask you to sing a song. Anyway, let's go to Claudia. ¿Qué es tu respuesta de eso?
Buenas noches. Bueno, mi primer idioma es el español y es con el que me siento más cómoda para hablar. Y una de las cuestiones que me mantiene en balance es que como inmigrante que vine huyendo en mi país de la opresión y de la persecución, la violencia que estuve experimentando en mi día a día, al llegar acá, tampoco fue fácil llegar a San Francisco. De hecho, una de las cuestiones es que estuve de lugar en lugar y precisamente viviendo con gente de mi país, y por lo mismo de ser quien yo soy, pues me sacaban de esos lugares, ¿no? Y llegué a San Francisco en condición de persona desamparada. Me costó navegar, en aquel entonces no conocía el idioma, pero también creo que afortunadamente tuve alguien me mencionó que habían servicios para la comunidad LGBTQ acá en San Francisco, y así fue como empecé mi jornada. Y recuerdo que me costó bastante, hubieron noches de muchas lágrimas, de mucho dolor, pero al mismo tiempo había algo que esta era mi oportunidad en realidad de ser quien yo soy. Y debo mencionar que fui clienta inicialmente de Instituto Familiar de la Raza, y pues empecé a recibir algunos servicios y orientación. A través de eso pude obtener asilo político también. Y otra de las cuestiones era, en mi caso como una mujer transgénero, por ejemplo, cómo lograr mi cambio de nombre. En aquel entonces no habían los servicios que hay ahora, creo que era diferente. Los servicios de prevención iban enfocados en uso de condones, lavar las agujas, usar agujas limpias todo el tiempo. Y posteriormente, ya cuando fui parte del personal de Instituto Familiar de la Raza, quise devolver también a la comunidad parte de los servicios, y además ayudar a aquellas personas que estaban llegando también y estaban enfrentando algunas situaciones muy similares a las que me tocó en mi caso, ¿no? Y fue por eso que creo que eso es lo que me ha motivado y me ha mantenido también en balance. Ciertamente no es fácil trabajar también con la comunidad. Hay algunos momentos en que puede ser duro trabajar con la comunidad. El vicarious trauma también es una realidad en nuestras vidas. Como seres humanos no podemos... en aquel entonces inicié como una outreach worker. He estado en diferentes capacidades en esta la carrera de prevención de VIH. Bueno, también como siendo parte del Instituto Familiar de la Raza, me gustaría mencionar el hecho de que el programa Hacia la Vida, al cual yo pertenezco ahora, inició precisamente como una respuesta al VIH en los 80s también. Okay. En aquel entonces, cuando no habían... Tú mencionaste de que la comunidad estaba siendo devastada con las muertes por el SIDA, ¿no? Sí. Y pues habían alguna información en inglés, sin embargo, recursos en español no existían en ese entonces. Y así fue como Instituto de la Raza también tomó pues el liderazgo en esto y inició un pequeño programa de prevención de VIH para las personas que hablan español. Y de ahí pues el programa ha crecido ya bastante.
Gracias. Bueno, muy buena respuesta, gracias. A ver, ahí vamos a explorar contigo más o menos cómo mantienes el balance del trabajo y también lo personal. Vamos a hablar de eso más. Bueno, Luca, what are your thoughts on that question?
Hello everyone, my name is Luca Amaru Fernandez. I'm a self-taught artist, an illustrator, fine artist, and I work as an art educator. I was born here in the Bay Area in San Jose, but I lived most of my life in Latin America. My mom is Peruvian and my dad is American, and I lived in Peru for 9 years, and I lived in Mexico for 1 year when I was very little. That's where my parents met, and I finished high school. We migrated to Argentina to finish my high school education there. I've been back in the Bay Area only since 2019, so I only got to experience San Francisco pre-pandemic 1 year, which is something that hearing all of this is, we live in unprecedented times, so it's kind of surreal to hear some of this, considering the time I came here into the city, and the time that a lot of young people are coming here to the city, thinking that all the generations going forward are arriving to San Francisco after COVID.
That's right.
So that's one thing I wanted to mention. My advocacy work started in high school. I was the first openly trans student in my high school in Buenos Aires. I am very grateful that Argentina does have a pretty decent LGBT rights. There's still a lot to work on. It was still not easy, and I wanted to bring up, kind of tying it into balance, bring up my first experience of activism burnout was at 18 because of that. And I remember when I got here, I had two feelings. I had, of course, the feeling of wanting to be an advocate. I participated in activities thanks to Promesa. Promesa was the first thing I came to when I got here to the city. I literally Googled it, and I showed up one day, and Tony, who is one of the wonderful facilitators, he told me, yeah, you showed up one day, and it was like usually people get referred here. Like, no one told me someone new was gonna come here, and this kid shows up, and, he kind of just wanted to vibe check me and see, like, what's his deal. I literally had just been here for like a month, so like big culture shock, didn't have any friends, really anxious, and, not knowing how to live life still, out of high school, just having gotten here. And what I wanted to kind of circle back to with this balance thing is that having experienced that activist burnout at a very young age, I went through a very prolonged period of just wanting to feel normal, of just wanting to live a life like everyone else gets to live, without having to worry about my transness or being tokenized. That was something that I felt really weighed down by, being the trans student, the trans advocate, the person that's always on the front. And sometimes I just want to live the complexity of my own life that is divorced from that, because I have a lot of interests. I'm a very multifaceted person, just like anyone else. So I'm going to keep returning back to the point. And
That's okay.
I think the question is very difficult for me to answer and honestly say that I have balance in my life. I feel like balance is very subjective. Something that is completely normal for someone can be very overwhelming for someone else. I've been experiencing a lot of that very recently without giving details. A lot of people in my life going through a lot of things, including myself. And I think balance is the hardest thing in life, and that in our system, I don't think balance is, at least in the Zen, like I do yoga in the mornings and like meditate and everything's like perfect and I get to center myself. Like that is I don't think that's really
Right.
possible in this day and age. I called my mom earlier this week to talk about this, to reflect on this, and I told her, I don't think that you can achieve balance in a system where you're expected to walk by people dying on the street and
That's
pretend
right.
like everything's okay. So I think what I wanted to bring up, because the other thing I wanted to bring up is the first thing I wanted to come to mind was like, oh, nature. I love nature. I've participated in environmental justice organizations and protests. I wanted to go into environmental science originally. And I went to Tahoe for the first time ever last week. It was beautiful. But even there are huge swaths of trees that are dying right now because of the drought. So even in those places where we think, oh, let's travel, let's take a vacation, you can't really escape the state of the
Right.
world right now.
Right.
So with all of that being said, then, I currently work as an art teacher and art educator, and I work with kids, and it can be very challenging, but it can also be very rewarding. And it's in those moments that I realize why I'm doing things. And I think balance really is, for me, reminding myself why I do what I do and accepting the balance of hopelessness and love, between those two feelings that are always there.
Well, I want to thank you for that. I mean, and I also want to thank you for reminding us that, that at not so much at your age, but at your level of experience, right, and how life impacts you completely different. And I accept that statement. I think it's really important for us, what I call the future generations. I'm an aunt to about 19, I have 19 nephews and nieces. And I think it's really important to listen. It's really important because we, as elders, we don't know it all. I think when I was that age, I thought I knew it all. And so I wanted to be listened to. And oftentimes it didn't happen. So I appreciate your answer and thank you for that. One of the things that you mentioned is around self-care. And it is really important to take care of yourself when we're doing this kind of work. And doing community work. It could be in the LGBTQ community or in the, when we're working with youth that are involved in violence prevention work. But I think is how do you manage trying to navigate systems that have not been acceptable to LGBTQ folks, trans folks? How does one manage that and how do you navigate those systems? Who wants to start?
Well, for
ahead.
me, I need to be connected to the community locally, but then I also need to be involved in the institutions that actually create some of the oppressions. If you recall, it took a long time, like 74 and 75 before the psychological and psychiatric associations said, okay, homosexuality is not a disease. I was brought up where, anybody could be thrown in jail for that, So I felt that given my training and being a psychologist, I needed to focus a lot of my attention on the responsibilities of my association in addressing the issues of not only LGBT, but also Latinx populations, and also training clinicians so that they can properly practice to address, to deal with our population, which now in California is 40% are Latinx in California. That's a large number, And if you figure, well, maybe 40% of those, 50% of those are primarily Spanish speakers, well, that's a lot of people that we need to actually feel like we need to be able to address properly and integrate some of the systems that they think are of their spirituality, of their culture, and their ways of thinking and customs, and integrate that into the healing process. Otherwise, people don't really heal or heal properly. So for me, I spent a lot of my time dealing with a lot of the associations, but also making sure that people locally knew that I'm available. If you want, like you called me and said, hey, can you do this? Yeah, I can do this. I'm here. And then also have a voice on a different stage that many other people may not be able to have that stage to do, basically because of my qualifications.
Claudia, ¿cómo has navegado si hay resistencia o los sistemas?
Definitivamente resisto que aún acá en San Francisco, siendo la meca de la comunidad LGBTQ, hay todavía mucho trabajo por hacer. Y quiero aprovechar también para agradecer a las personas que a los activistas del pasado, personas que probablemente ya no están con nosotros, pero creo que ellos hicieron un buen trabajo, dejar la semilla, y ha sido cuestión de las generaciones que vienen detrás a hacer crecer esas semillas. Y espero también que pues las generaciones que van de venir encuentren un mejor lugar. Esa es mi esperanza para el futuro. Y hay muchas cuestiones, incluso como a nivel de ser una persona transgénero, han habido algunos retos que son únicos también para la comunidad transgénero, ¿no? El asunto de, por ejemplo, que nos reconozca el género con el cual nos identificamos, ya en los sistemas, en los sistemas médicos, por ejemplo. Mis primeras experiencias acá no fueron de lo más agradables posibles, ¿no? Pero creo que una de las maneras como que puedo recordar, el activismo creo que ha sido una parte muy, muy, muy importante. Para este entonces, honestamente yo no estoy participando mucho en cuestiones de activismo. Sin embargo, a inicios de mi carrera en Instituto Familiar de la Raza, se me abrió también esa oportunidad para poder, por ejemplo, ir a foros comunitarios, a tener la voz también. Recuerdo, por ejemplo, una vez yo tenía ya algún contacto y al día siguiente me estaban contestando. Entonces creo que es cuestión de estar luchando contra los sistemas. Mencionaste también el hecho de los cortes presupuestarios. Recuerdo el año 2005 cuando ninguna de las agencias latinas que brindaban servicios para la comunidad latina recibieron fondos. Era cero para todos. Quiero recordar a quien era mi supervisora en ese entonces, Berta Hernández, y la comunidad se unió también. Se crearon foros comunitarios, estuvimos en el Mission Cultural Center for Latino Arts, y se hicieron varias demostraciones y finalmente logramos que nos dieran, aunque sea unos pocos fondos para poder seguir sirviendo a nuestra comunidad. Y de ahí para acá creo que pues seguimos en la lucha. Cada día enfrentamos diferentes retos para poder llevar los servicios, para poder proveer los servicios a la comunidad. Los sistemas son complejos, son difíciles de seguir. A mí no me gusta la política, pero principalmente cuando vienen cuestiones políticas, todavía esto se enreda mucho, mucho más, ¿no? Y creo que de nosotros depende también seguir luchando. Y una de las cuestiones muy importantes es también la unidad en la comunidad, que podamos unirnos, como mencionó el doctor Morales, de que han habido diferentes movimientos, pero han sido aislados unos de los otros. Y mientras que si... el dicho dice, divide y vencerá. Entonces, creo que nos toca hacer lo contrario, es unirnos como una familia, como un frente único para poder derribar todas esas barreras que nos están interponiendo y luchar contra la injusticia, contra la inequalidad, para poder lograr un mejor bienestar para nuestra comunidad. Es algo que no vamos a lograr de la noche a la mañana, pero si no lo empezamos, nunca lo vamos a lograr tampoco.
Gracias. Wow, thank you for that answer. We will return to the RAMA Blueprints Live podcast, Above and Beyond Silencio Jamás, after this quick message.
On RAMA Blueprints podcast, we speak with Jim Queen, co-founder of EMUNYO and Real Alternatives program, about how the East Mission United Neighborhood Youth Organization, or EMUNYO, was founded in San Francisco in 1967.
One day, I get this phone call. There's some young people that would like to meet with someone to help them try and find a place, to meet and so forth. And what was so interesting was male and female, Black, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, white. I said, I will help you on one condition, is that I will only do this. You guys have to agree that you'll be in charge. Is that clear? Yep. And we just found this place that had a little for rent sign on 23rd in Florida. Knock on a person's door. A lady comes out, and so the young people explained to them what we wanted. And she said, okay, I'll make a deal. I'll let you have this place 6 months free if you agree to paint it on the inside and the outside. And so the young people said, yeah, okay, we can do that. We get to paint and paint the inside, paint the outside, right? You side said you would run the thing. How are we going to do this? You have to organize it. You have to develop your rules and regulations, how you're going to run this place, but you are in charge. Is that clear? Yep.
Listen to the RAMA Blueprints on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.
We return to Above and Beyond, Silencio Jamás.
Look, I was thinking about what you said and thinking about how you might enlighten us with some of the more thoughts that you might be having about what you're hearing in regards to what do you think the next steps are for you, not just personally, but as being involved as a young adult and setting the motion forward to reminding elders what are some of the things that are needed by young people. So when I think about this movement, and I agree with you, the isolation doesn't help, right? Working alone doesn't help. And that is probably one of the lessons that we needed to learn and need to learn. And so when you hear this, what does it make you think about? Go ahead.
But I think there's of course, many ways that I could approach this and voice the needs of youth. Mm-hmm. Latino youth, more specifically. I could be more specific, trans Latino youth.
Right.
What Claudia was sharing about her experience of being misgendered reminds me of something I've been hearing from several youth at Promesa, the Latino youth group I've been going to since 2019, is how difficult it is as a newly arrived immigrant here in the workforce in particular, whether it be under the table or not. It's much harder to deal with transphobia and misgendering when you are surrounded by folks who are not educated in terms of respecting and acknowledging diverse identities. And I think that, again, it really comes to me the basic needs, a place to live, food on the table, a community. I feel like the urge, how is it possible that we live in a system where this is not a basic needs, that everyone's basic needs aren't met? And so, because it's a domino effect, I'm talking about misgendering at work, but why do they need to work? Because they need a place to live, they need the money to eat, they need to build their lives based on the money that they make at work. So it's they face misgendering and violence because they have to. And so that's one thing. And the other thing, and this is a little bit more broad, speaking more so for Gen Z and younger, and even tying it into the students I see that I teach, or even I have a nephew, just the one. But what a different time this is for socializing. It's very hard for kids the kids don't go out and spend time with their friends on their own, unsupervised from adults. It's all scheduled, it's all organized in spaces. And even for teenagers and young adults, I've been seeing talk about the lack of third places, which are spaces where people can exist without paying money, that aren't at home or at an institution like school or whatnot. I think Promesa fills that gap for a lot of us, a space where we can arrive as ourselves, have a meal, be with like-minded peers. And I would even say that this is what I always recommend to any person that I have encountered that is only just starting their gender transition or starting to find themselves. I'm like, go to a group, meet people like you, see that you're not alone, be in a physical space with people that you can see face to face. Because I've found online communities, and they've been helpful. When I was in Argentina in particular, I was lucky enough to find a trans youth group in Buenos Aires that I could support myself with while I was there, and that was very much like something that really helped me. I guess like the question being like what youth needs, I feel like of course it's a lot of things, but I feel like there are things being provided, like you mentioned, like budget cuts and stuff. Like there's always this sabotage because of the profit-driven system that we live in. And so for every win that we have, it feels only temporary, because at some point there's going to be a cut. At some point there's going to, like an end to these movements, right? Because of this like rise and fall of these either services or movements or spaces. I'm not really trying to come to like a very concrete solution, solution here, but these are just some of the thoughts that are kind of percolating in my mind.
Well, thank you for that. Dr. Morales, I know you've done a lot of research and done a lot of work, and as you're saying about at some point these movements, will die or the money runs out, and okay, well, let's throw a little bit more money here so that they can keep doing that. But we were having this conversation about, political representation and what does that mean, and I don't want to get so politico or politica, but I just think it's important to mention to the people that are listening about, how that isn't always a solution, but at the same time, how that might help into sustaining some of the programming that are going on or continue the services.
Although it's important to have allies, among the politicians who hold office. But if you really think about it, when was the last time we had somebody on the board of supervisors who was Latinx? I mean, I don't remember. And they're the ones who finally approved budgets for the San Francisco, for example. So there are some significant things that they do provide. I think this is not so unique to us here in San Francisco. My university, which I was there for 32 years before I retired, it's actually the largest psychological, produces more psychologists than any other university in the United States, about 15%. And they had a campus in Mexico City. And so I was asked, can I do something in Mexico City? Well, for the LGBTQ people, and I said, okay, we can do something. And so I did a power breakfast at the Sheraton Hotel, which is in La Avenida de Independencia, where you have the Ángel de Independencia, was overlooking where we were having breakfast. And everybody came in, and it surprised me that that was the first time the leaders in that group, in that city, got together in one place to talk to each other. And I was like, oh. So that means, everybody has different agendas and different things and different perceptions. And so I had to twist what we were going to do and try to make sure we were all on the same page before we can talk about advocacy, talk about how to talk to the media, and talk about things of what we could do in terms of developing their skills and dealing in terms of moving their abilities as leaders within Mexico City. So having people in political office is really important, as well as people on different committees, so you have the full spectrum. One thing that I've been pushing in, looking for funding in Águilas, and luckily we've gotten some funding to develop workforce development among LGBTQ Latinx people. And so we focused on 4 different areas: basic financial knowledge, effective communication, especially with the media, legal awareness, what are your rights, and also effective strategies for advocacy. So we offer like a 4-hour workshop for each of those topics, which comes to 12 hours, and then give out a certificate that bridges Águilas with Alliant International University. So make sure you put that on your resume, because that's important. It's important to have that. here in the United States, things that are on paper are very important. And so having that credibility is very important, and to document that you do have this knowledge, you do have this at least basic training, and then we offer the same kind of training on a second level, which we finished a whole round of an advanced level of these same topic areas, to try to help people become members of board of directors of nonprofit organizations, for example, and things like that. So that people feel comfortable, they feel, okay, I know something about what to do if I get into that situation, rather feel like I really feel blindsided in coming into these meetings, not knowing what to do.
Well, thank you for that. Claudia, no sé si quieres decir algo.
Bueno, como mencioné anteriormente, la política no es mi fuerte.
Pero tienes opinión de algo.
Ya, sí, definitivamente. Es algo con lo que nos toca lidiar, es parte del sistema. Y tiene muchas veces es manejado también por intereses muy particulares, sino es que la mayoría de las veces. Y nos toca también a veces, como dicen, bailar al son que nos tocan. Desafortunadamente, ¿no? Y principalmente cuando viene la cuestión de fondos, se me ocurre, volviendo a la cuestión de divide y vencerás, por ejemplo, recuerdo en aquellos entonces, eso de que es como que fondos, pero la manera como se distribuyen también es como que saquemos esto y que se peleen entre ellos y a ver quién gana. Y es una cuestión relacionada con la política también.
¿Cómo no? Sí.
Y como, no sé, crear la división en sí que les conviene al sistema mantener, en la que nos mantiene, ¿no? Y es importante también mantener un ojo abierto, como digo, aunque no me gusta, pero mantener el ojo abierto por las cuestiones de qué es lo que está sucediendo en el mundo de la política y en qué cosas podemos nosotros pues abogar por nuestra comunidad. Y al final de cuentas, abogando por nuestra comunidad, estamos abogando por nosotros mismos también. Por muy difícil, muy complicado, muy... a veces la palabra, y perdón por ser tan franca, pero a veces la palabra parece que fuera una mala palabra.
La política no cabe en la azucarera.
Así es,
sí,
ajá. Entonces, pero sin embargo es parte del sistema con lo que tenemos que navegar. Así que pues,
Just want to comment about a little bit about our history here. The oldest Latinx organization in the United States is here in San Francisco. It's the Puerto Rican Social Club. It's right here in the Mission. It was incorporated in February 25 of 1912. Can you imagine? How that came to be, I'm not really sure. Maybe that had to do with the transport of sugar workers from the island to on the way to Hawaii, and things like that. But we do have a strong history here in terms of contributing to moving our community broadly forward. And it's here in our city.
Right, and I also want to remind folks too, you're getting ready to elect a representative of the Mission District, I think. And I think it's really important to encourage the individuals that are running around, this division that sometimes exists and holding people accountable. It's easy to get people in office. I had a minor involvement when I was representing and running up and down to the mayor's office and representing the Mission District. And it's a very difficult role to be in, but holding those people that sit in those seats it's very important. I think about Bambi Salcedo,
in Los Angeles.
Yeah, Los Angeles Trans Latina organization, and I think about watching it on CNN And she was so frustrated with all the deportations of the trans folks that were being deported back to Mexico and all over Central America. Because she wasn't being listened to, she threw her shoe and hit Barack Obama in the head. Yeah, it's true. Look it up. And she threw her shoe because that's how frustrada she had gotten, to the point where she says, no, I'm going to react. And sometimes we have to react, and sometimes we have to take it upon ourselves. You know, some of us have been arrested, some of us haven't, but that voice is really critical. And I agree, we got to get on those boards, we have to do those things and represent and reach out. So I wanted us to move to another part of this conversation where we allow the audience to make a comment and or say something that maybe that's come to their mind or their heart. And I know we had somebody that was going to go ahead and say something. Go ahead, Maria.
Hello, my name is Maria Medina Serafin. I'm an OG from the old days and from the days of Gala, and actually. So, and glue, I actually had to put an all-woman band and go down and play LA with glue. The thing is that we've had organizations, we've had a cohesiveness in the community, but what's lacking now, because of so many things coming up, and this pandemic really separated us because we were on lockdown for a whole year, and so we have stopped talking to each other. As connected as we are online, on our phones and everything, we are so disconnected. We don't speak to each other anymore. You know, whatever having a conversation. You know, you go somewhere to somebody's party and everybody's on their phone. You know, we're missing those events that united us. You know what I'm saying? And those organizations, when Gala was around, well, hey, there was a lot of activism around gay rights, around the HIV situation, like that. But I think right now, because we are so separated and disconnected, we need to come back. We need to come back to the connections. We need to come back to the connections. That's why this is so incredible that we have this podcast, that we have generations of elders, that we have young people, that we, unite. And that's what we need, porque la fuerza está en la unión. No, outside of it, we don't have anything, you know?
Thank you for your comments, yeah. She needs an applause for that, man. That was really awesome. Did you want to respond? Does anybody want to make a comment? Go ahead, Luca.
I'm taking in all this information and I'm feeling everything that everyone is saying. And I'm so, first off, I just want to say how grateful it is to hear a lot of this history firsthand. I feel like a lot of young queer youth don't have the honor to experience something like this. So I just want to put that out there. One of the most, probably my formative experiences here in San Francisco was at the Castro Public Library, where there was a event for Jesus Barragan, I believe, founder of Gala, I think. This was like 3 years ago, and it was essentially an opportunity to speak with a Latino queer elder at the space, and they set up the chairs. He was sitting there and no one showed up for like 15, 20 minutes, and they were like, okay, we're gonna just take it down, looks like no one's really coming. And I was sitting there and I was like, I just came here to hang out with a friend, and I just saw this happening, and then I ended up having a 1 hour conversation with him, telling me the whole history of Gala firsthand. And again, it's one of those things where I feel very lucky to have experienced something like that. And I want to tie this into the present, right? Because, I mean, this is true for every time period, being unprecedented. But I think it's especially true for right now, how unprecedented these times are in terms of where people are at both materially. The city gets more and more expensive every day. It's incredibly hard to both make a living here, make enough to pay your rent, and even then, in a place with like 5 roommates or more sometimes, or maybe less, or just very tiny places that barely meet your needs. You're spending all of this time working something that you're doing just to survive. I hear so many stories of people, go to college, that'll be successful. I know so many people with college degrees that are working retail jobs. In my generation, college isn't even a guarantee at this point. So you're kind of facing a reality where you have to work yourself to death to barely make ends meet. And with whatever time you have left, how are you going to change the world? How is youth supposed to change the world if we can barely make enough to survive, and especially be able to secure any kind of future, as far as whatever future stability you would like to call it, homeownership, a stable career, a community where you're talking face to face. And that really stood out to me, the idea of talking face to face. And I even think to myself, like, why don't I do that more? Time, energy is one thing, but I think another key aspect here is that a lot of young people are growing up in a very different social level where you don't go out and meet out with your friends in the streets, you text them, all your interactions are on social media, all your interactions are on the phone, that in-person interactions become awkward and anxiety-inducing. So I think actually one thing that just occurred to me, especially for, the reality is that younger generations are forming their social skills on a screen. So that fundamentally changes the psychology of how human beings are going to interact with each other. I even see it in myself sometimes where I get really anxious, or I find it difficult to talk to people when I am not teaching or having to make a point. But I think what I've also done, and this is part of my advocacy work, I host a monthly figure drawing group, low cost, queer arts featured in the Castro. And it is, figure drawing is drawing from a live model. And one of my personal passions is making art education accessible and introducing people to art without making it intimidating or making it seem like something that you have to go to school or any of those things. Like, I want to take down all barriers to art. And especially, I'm going to put it out there in this age of AI, where even in this AI art and stuff like that's something I'm very passionate about. It's like, damn, we can't pay our bills, we can't, live our lives. And on top of that, we want to take away what we love, our art, or the stuff that makes life worth living, and you want everything to be automated and make money. And it's like, it feels like every single escape that we might have, nature, art, it's like, boom, you don't have this, boom, you don't have that. And now you have to spend more time working. And I feel like there's this pressure building with youth. There's this rage, there's this frustration, there's this hopelessness. And I feel like there isn't a place to channel it. That's one. And two, in the spaces, the community spaces that I have facilitated, I feel like social interactions are fundamentally changing. So facilitation of spaces, of community events, getting people to talk to each other, the approach has to be different. It unfortunately sometimes just doesn't happen organically. Right. So someone has to facilitate that group, has to mediate that conversation, because I feel like with the way, I think either it could be the school system, it could be society, it could be our phones, whatever you want to call it, but I feel like there's almost this feeling of, I can't initiate this interaction unless given permission to. I don't want to bug someone. I don't want to bother them. Maybe it's a little bit personal to me. But I feel like in my experience facilitating, like yesterday I facilitated a figure drawing group with two wonderful drag artists of color at Queer Arts Featured. Shout out to Matt the Two-Spirit and Lisa Frankenstein. And I started quiet, and slowly people started chiming in, and then we're drawing, but it was this back and forth, all kinds of queer people, all backgrounds, different age groups. And it took a little bit to break the ice, but suddenly it was like, damn, I haven't been in a group with like more than 3 people interacting all at once in so long, on equal terms, So I think I think what I'm trying to point out here is that I honor history in the past, and I think we need to create spaces where it's taught, and memoria. There's something that they say a lot in Argentina because of the dictatorship, the US-backed dictatorship in Argentina, that they say a lot, memoria, verdad y justicia. And they teach that at schools siempre. It's like, it's graffitied on walls, it's on murals, memoria, verdad y justicia. And I feel like that's something that needs to be brought in queer spaces, in Latino spaces, memoria, forgive but never forget, And simultaneously understanding that things can never go back to the way they were. And we have to approach things with it has to be a new approach to this new present.
I wanted to comment on what you said, because I think it's, having a whole bunch of nephews and nieces that are texting. I make it a point I'm also the eldest of my own tribe. And sometimes they're like, tia, okay. And it's really around making time as elders to sit with young people and look at them eye to eye, corazón a corazón, and listen and have conversation. And I learned a lot of that here, doing that work, but when it's in your own family structure and they're questioning or things are going on in their lives, it's really important for them to really sit down and listen. It's very easy for them to respond to me on text, and they're quick, but I don't get the real feeling about who they are. And so I think it's really important. And Maria, I agree with you. I think, in those times because when I got to San Francisco, I got fully integrated into the whole lesbiana, gay, Amelias. I was out there just doing it and listening. And I think about the very first time I met Teresita. And for those of you who, I think us three probably know who she is. But I will tell you that Teresita, when first time I saw her perform, right? No sé si conoces quién era Teresita, she's, Teresita la Campesina.
Sí.
Yeah, and I saw her singing on Valencia at the restaurant there. But I saw her singing at Amelia's, and I was like, wow, like this is just out there, right? And people were doing it. There was that community, and I think it existed. And the purpose, again, like Maria said in the podcast, is to, not just the podcast, but is about telling the stories and sitting down and listening to the story. Because often, as younger generation folks come in, they don't get that insight, they don't get that wisdom, and hopefully they're listening to it so they can carry it on. And they can do that, because this is how our people sat. We sat in circles, we talked, we communicated, we listened to our elders. And that's hopefully what we're trying to do with the podcast, is so that these stories are sitting not just on a website, but people are actually having conversation. So Darren, I know you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, as we were talking about open communication and providing that energy to reignite a movement, right? I think I want to pose a question to both the doctor and to Claudia. What are some of those things that we can, almost like the low-level hanging fruit that we can provide in order to re-energize this movement? Because for me, it kind of seems like a lot of organizations are working in silo when they should be working together. Even though they may have a common mission, maybe their functions and the way that they operate are in different areas. But with that, what are some of the strategies that could be used that maybe don't exist right now, but maybe existed in the past, that we could use to reignite and energize this movement and put it together and come as a united front?
Well, I want to acknowledge that not only have you been a teacher, but you've been a mentor to your students. So that's one thing, that we can share mentorship across the board and across agencies. And that's one thing that can happen, that can help bridge across the different organizations. Sometimes our funding is very siloed, and then suddenly you get tracked into trying to meet your objectives, and it doesn't really permit the time to actually do the larger kind of work so that the whole community gets lifted, but actually you're just trying to sustain the funding level moving forward, and that makes it difficult. But certainly the mentoring aspect of it is, and the dialogue that we're having here, sharing the dialogue at different organizations. I think these are ways, people need continuing education credit. Hey, I can do that. My license allows me to do that. So, and also sharing strategies that work. Sometimes conferences help that, because that allows the dialogue to happen. We can have gatherings where we can talk about our best practices, and then this way we can share. So how many times have people come and who work in different nonprofit organizations had a chance to sit down and talk to each other. You know, they're so busy with their work and then their personal life that suddenly things get very siloed. So I think there are some ways that we can kind of reach out across the board so that it can help the interaction among the different organizations to happen.
I wanted to ask what are the moments of joy or inspiration that keep you going in your work?
Yeah, en mi caso ha sido el hecho de poder ayudar a mi comunidad, ayudar a alguien. Este trabajo a veces lo veo como el trabajo de un predicador, que estamos llevando el mensaje a diferentes personas. Y no sabemos quiénes en realidad van pues a seguir el consejo en algunas ocasiones. Recuerdo que para mí fue cuando me enteré que uno de mis clientes, que había sido mi cliente, le dieron un resultado positivo para VIH. Me cuestioné mucho el aspecto de qué estoy haciendo entonces, de qué sirve lo que estoy haciendo. Pero también hay otras personas que han venido y ya algunas de ellas probablemente ya no me acuerdo y vienen, oye, ¿te recuerdas de mí? ¿Me ayudaste con esto, con lo otro? Y mírame dónde estoy ahora y muchas gracias por ello. Y el hecho de poder ayudar a alguien en realidad, aunque no recibamos un gracias después de eso, pero esa satisfacción que queda después de haberle brindado la mano a alguien, y eso no tiene un valor.
That's right.
Ya, es algo con lo que te quedas, es algo con lo que disfrutas, que te hace seguir adelante. Y es lo que me ha producido mayores satisfacciones en esto de este trabajo. Y todavía, pues ahorita es más administrativo, pero todavía hay personas que vienen y quieren saludarme porque fueron mis clientas en determinado momento. Y eso, les digo, es algo para poder continuar, que me ayuda a seguir adelante en el día a día. Y lo mismo, decirles también a mis compañeros, oye, vale la pena lo que estamos haciendo.
Muy importante, gracias por eso. Where have you found the joy, or what are those moments?
I think for me, the mentoring aspect, because I do a lot of mentoring of people and in their careers and watching them grow and develop and see them take initiatives that are to their heart and then watch them use their skills and feel open and confident that they can do it. So that's something it's another way to kind of see a benefit of what's going on besides watching the internal process of somebody feeling better and by your interaction with them so that they feel that they're being healed together with you. Because I think the healing process doesn't come from me. It comes mutually, you know. I give you different options and then let's see what works and then use the stuff that does work with the client and then watch them grow with that.
Luca, do you have a comment and share maybe a joyous or what moves you?
Yeah, I feel like maybe this is also true for more than just me. Or I feel like a lot of the times you hear, do what you love, and that is very important. But I think more importantly than that, I think, not to get like really existential, but if you think about the origins of humanity and the way work existed before capitalism, before colonialism, before anything that we live under today, work was done for the community. Work was done to live for the next day, for someone that you knew, for someone that you cared about. You didn't do it because, oh, I don't know, what am I getting out of it? You're doing it because you love the people around you. So I think work that brings you back to that core human trait is what, even with hard work, makes it worth it. Because I've worked a lot of jobs. I've worked as a gardener, I've worked retail, I've worked random internships, briefly in mental health field. And out of all of these, the ones, I actually went into gardening kind of wanting to connect with the earth and feel, connected more to nature. I'm very drawn to nature. But it didn't satisfy me because it was commercial. It was, for working for a lot of rich people in the city, and I didn't like that. But with working either in the mental health field or now in education, I think there's always, like Claudia mentioned, when you see, and just like also Eduardo mentioned, when you see someone that you've mentored, that you've helped, you see a spark in them that you awakened or that you nurtured. And even just to close with those moments of hope, of excitement, of like I made a change and a positive impact on someone's life, is what keeps you going even past the very difficult and stressful days. This week was the first time a student talked back to me, and it really shook me. Like it was admittedly even a little triggering for me because I was teased a lot in school, so it really brought me back to that place. And I got really mad first inside of me, but then I cooled down. I was like, I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to keep going to class. And then during our break, I spoke to him. I was like, hey, we need to talk.
Yeah.
And I had a calm conversation with him, and he ended up apologizing and by his own volition and admitting to his own struggles.
Right.
And I think in those moments, especially with, I see this with younger kids, but I think it's also very true for adults when you break a cycle of violence. When you treat someone the way you wish you had been treated, and when you see yourself in the other, tú eres mi otro yo.
That's right. And
Those are the moments that I think make me feel like, this is worth it, even with the challenges.
Thank you for that. That saying, tú eres mi otro yo, is a personal mantra of mine that I have, because of the experiences working here in this community. And just today, walking down the 24th, I run into someone and says, oh, I remember when you... And, I had a conversation with Concha before this, and we talked about work and finding the joy in work. And she goes, socorro, it isn't work. If you look at it as work, then it will always be challenging to you. And, if you know Concha, she's, the way she speaks to you, it just kind of penetrates through you. She said, for me, it's a vocation. This is what I have chosen. This is the road that I have chosen. And I think in that we find that joy, and if we stay in it, you're going to find these moments. I mean, look at us. We're doing a podcast about the things we love to do, and I think that's super important. And we're going to find those moments where it's going to become so challenging and resisting and resilience and, all the stuff that we fight against. But we have to look back, reflect, and think about what's to the greater good and for the greater good of the community. And some of us can do it a long time and some of us have to kind of exit when it's time, and it's okay. It's okay to just say, ya hice mi tiempo. They say there's a season and a reason for everything, and we find that season and we find that reason. Claudia and Dr. Morales, and yourself too, Luca, what is your organization doing right now? What are some of the important things that you're addressing?
Ok, no, en sí a la vida, nuestro enfoque principal es prevención de VIH. Tenemos servicios para personas viviendo con VIH y personas que son negativas. Y creo que uno de los avances que han habido en y esto ha surgido algo en nuestro programa, es que, como les mencionaba al inicio, era usa condones y lava tus agujas. Pero como que saturamos también a la comunidad con ese mensaje. Y el hecho es que necesitamos ver a la persona como una persona completa, con todas sus necesidades y los factores psicosociales que van a intervenir para que la persona tenga para el bien de esa persona, ¿no? Y en realidad la gran mayoría de personas que vienen a nuestros servicios no están buscando, lo último que tienen en su mente es VIH. La principal motivación son otras necesidades de comunidad. Y eso es lo que nosotros estamos ofreciendo. Y les digo, en el pasado era la maldición o la bendición de la maldición del VIH, que era podíamos dar otros servicios, pero es el poder ayudarles a las personas y luego incorporar la parte de prevención también. Es la manera efectiva. Si no vemos a la persona como una persona completa, si con todas sus necesidades, nunca vamos a ser efectivos en el VIH.
Gracias, gracias. Doctor.
Yeah, for us, what we've tried to do is look at the complexity of what people face. And so we do groups as well as individual sessions with people, and we ask people what are the challenges are they facing, because it's not just, you know, using a condom or practicing safe sex. That sounds easy, but actually it's more complex than that. There are a lot of behavioral interventions, behavioral things that happen in your life when you meet someone, and then it might put you at risk for something that you don't want to get, you know. And it's not just HIV, it could be hepatitis, it could be a lot of different things. So it's important for people to tell you what are the subject matters that they're experiencing, and then focus the intervention, let's say the group discussion, around the topics that they feel are challenging to them personally at the time. And that's something that we do. And then the other thing that we do at Aguilas is a lot of people, they've never really worked in these kinds of different positions. So it's a good entry level for a lot of people. And so you're trying to teach them of how to do certain kinds of work so that they build their work skills as they move forward. And we've had people who've worked with us that suddenly they became in charge of departments in the Department of Public Health. And it's that's the other aspect that we try to do at Aguilas, is try to help people. This can be a good entry level for you to learn how to sharpen and develop your work skills and your desires, so that then you can do the vocation that actually you feel you're drawn to.
Thank you for that. Luca, what is a couple of things about Promesas?
Yeah. Promesa is a wonderful safe haven for queer Latino youth. For queer youth in general, we have had several non-Latino youth also choose Promesa as their space. I think it says a lot about the group that non-Latinos have found it as their safe space. And I think, well, currently the group is primarily monolingual Spanish-speaking Latino youth. I've recently heard that, thanks to a grant, Promesa will be expanding, having hopefully more meeting times. I think that's probably a big challenge currently. It only takes place 1 day a week. And, you know, if someone's busy, if someone has work, if someone has responsibilities or things come up and you can't make it that time, you can't make it to your community, to your space. So that's something that is going to change soon. I'm very excited to hear that. Also having, like, you know, not to kind of bring it down to something like sounding silly, but like having that, like, I know Promesa is going to have a space of its own, because currently we have our meetings at Instituto Familiar de la Raza meeting room, but I know Promesa will have its own space very soon, which is really cool, a space for youth, by youth. Well, and Promesa provides community space, case management, now therapy, food for during the meeting, and access to different services in the city. And also, I think I want to really appreciate, right now, the group has always been very strong. There's been a strong tendency of friendships forming. It's not just you show up and you leave. A lot of people make long-lasting connections there. And you make long-lasting connections not just with your peers, but also the facilitators. I feel very much a strong mentorship bond with them. I almost feel like your older sibling guiding you through this world as a queer person. I think this is something that I've heard before on how with our ethnicity, we have history and ancestors to look back on, but with sometimes queerness, there isn't that same connection like that. So I think having that at Promesa, this almost is kind of, you know, mentorship of like, I've been where you're at, I'm going to help you take the next steps, is, you know, all of those things that I just said, and that I think make it just a wonderful place, and it's going, you know, becoming even more special as time goes on.
Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank all our guests. I want to thank Dr. Morales. I want to thank Claudia Cabrera. I want to thank you, Luca Fernandez, for stepping in and being here. And I want to thank Bravo Women for the Arts and remind folks that you can listen to the podcast at CARECENSF.org and also wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thank you again, and have a good night, and peace, love, and happiness.
La conexión, conecta, conecta con tu corazón. Conecta, conecta con tu corazón.
The Five Sisters Audio Garden would like to acknowledge the following: CARECEN SF and its marketing team, Instituto Familiar de la Raza, United Players, Horizons Unlimited, Pacific Resource Hut, SALT, and the many individual supporters who have graciously donated to our production. It is because of your kindness that we are able to produce the RAMA Blueprints podcast. We would like to dedicate this show to all those whose paths we have crossed and who have joined the ancestors. Rest in power. This episode was produced and edited by Darren J. De Leon and Socorro Gamboa. If you like our show, subscribe, give it a rating on Apple Podcasts, and share it with 2 people. Please spread the word, and remember, to listen is to heal. All power to the people.
Tú eres la luz que brilla en el oriente. Tú eres el lirio que florece en la montaña. Tú eres la luz que brilla en el oriente. Tú eres el lirio que florece en la montaña. Tú eres la luna melancólica que baña a la plateada espuma del amor. A la plateada espuma del amor. Con tu corazón.